Thank you so much, Kane, for having me here today. It's exciting to be the first speaker ever of this Content Harmony series. It's kind of amazing. So here we go. So I am a copywriter. I've been with Portent for a year now, and I come to copywriting from, I have an MFA in creative writing. And I was looking for a way to make, exactly, how do you make a living with an MFA in creative writing? You don't. So you become a copywriter or do something else. And I speak 5 languages because of growing up around the world. And so I really love language and linguistics. And so what I want to do today is bring that all together into this presentation to talk about a linguistic approach to copywriting and getting the voice right. So SEO copywriting, surprisingly enough, is not about words. It's especially not about keywords. It's about communication. And so for a long time, we were telling our clients, you got to get the keywords on the page, got to get the keywords on the page. And so what do? They put the keywords all over the page. It was terrible. And Google hates it, and we can't do that. So, but words and language are the medium that we're using for communicating. So there are other media that we can use, photos, obviously, video. Google can't read them as well, though, so we have to do special treatments. And so luckily for me, the MFA, trying to make a living, words are it. So I'm really hoping that Google doesn't get more sophisticated. So one of the things we do as people is we scan and dismiss. We do it all day long. We did it on the savannah when there was like a lion out there. It's kind of like this moving shape, and you're like, okay, I see that, I'm gonna run. It happens on the web all the time. We do it really fast. We see something, it either fits us or it doesn't fit us, and we click on or we click through. And so when you're you wanna make sure that your voice is right for your client when you're writing. So language is a tool, and it's a tool that most of us aren't using as well as we could. I know I learn something every day about how to use language better, but it's an extremely powerful tool, and it's an extremely nimble tool. So we're going to talk about dialect, and this is kind of where the linguistics comes in. Dialect is just a language that people share, and it's shaped by region, it's shaped by all kinds of factors we'll get into later. So, like this. Region. Okay, my dad uses the word chifforobe. Does anybody in this word? Okay, I love that word. I think it's beautiful, but mostly readers know that word. It's a word from the South. There's also social class. For example, we hear the terms 99% and 1% a lot right now. The 99% use the term 1% a lot different than the other way around. Age. I get a lot of, we're going to talk later about prom. I get a lot of my inspiration from my hairdresser, who is really super young, and she tells me to use words like totes, and so then I use them in my copy and I bring them home. My husband loves it. They're shaped by our profession. My dad's an economist, so I grew up with words like opportunity cost. Yeah. And then education is where you have to think about like your Fletch-Kincaid reading level all the time when you're writing, because you can easily come off either too slow for your clients, customers, or you can come off too snobby, and people know. Gender. This isn't as much of an issue in the United States, but it's kind of a big deal in places like Japan, where there's actually an entirely separate dialect for women when they speak to other women, because they speak softer and they use different language. But it's still something to consider when you're writing. Race, we don't talk about it in the Pacific Northwest, but when I was growing up, Ebonics and whether Ebonics was going to be taught in the schools or not was a big deal. Something to consider. Be very careful with it, but it's something to consider. And then religion. Some of your clients are going to use God with a big G, and some of them aren't. And whether you ever use God in your copy or not, their customers, it's a very different way of speaking, and so you want to be conscious of it. So language is a collection of our experiences. These are mine. We've got my family is over here, and my education is here. My love for television is over here. This is what I do. This is what I would do if I had all the money in the world. Talk about my mom. She speaks a certain language because she's a CPA. And so because I spoke her language, because I worked for her from a young age, I ended up working in a CPA firm for a long time because it was a natural fit. That'll come into play later. So shared language breeds trust. This is how we know that we're like each other. This is how we know that we can communicate with each other. This is important with your clients and their customers because it's how you keep them on the page. It's how you keep them clicking through. So my friend Angela is also a CPA. I, ironically enough, met her in a CPA firm. But the reason that Angela and I knew that we could be friends, one of the reasons, is because we both speak the same language. Angela uses all kinds of wonderful, arcane CPA kind of speak, like amortization and 706 and W9, and she knows what they all are, and I can get about 40% of it, which is better than most people. But it's how we know that we can connect. And then dialects also divide us. And it's pretty easy to do that, and you see this with the older generations and the younger generations all the time. Sometimes the divide between dialects is tragic. So this is an area called Plitvice in Croatia, which was part of the Yugoslav Republic. And you have Slovenian, the way you say good morning in Slovenian is dobar dan. The way you say good morning in Croatian is dobar dan. And so that's the difference of one vowel. Well, okay, that's no big deal. Serbo-Croatian, Slovenian is actually a different language than Serbo-Croatian, but it was all one language. Well, in 1991, in this beautiful, beautiful forest, the first shot of the Yugoslav war was fired. And so then all of a sudden, it becomes really important whether you like me or not like me. But then sometimes language dividing us is just silly. How many people in this room are SEOs? Okay, so you guys use all kinds of crazy new words that I've never heard before, and I'm trying to learn them. But what are some other ones? Can you think of besides canonicalization? SERP, yeah, Rebecca still uses SERP, and I kind of Google it occasionally. I mean, I know what it is, but I keep looking for it to make sure it's a real word, because it's like, it's all, ugh. Anyway, just kidding. But it's important, because it's not just about how you're communicating with your client and their customer, it's about how you communicate with your team. And so you have to make sure that everybody's speaking the same language. And sometimes it's nice to translate things a little. Oops, sorry. So language also connects us to brands. And you'll see this is the same slide I had up earlier, except for now I've got the brands that the quotes all came from. Mostly you can tell that I like movies a lot. And important down here. So, but these are the phrases that kind of come through my life. They are things that I repeat in conversation. They are jokes that I tell Rebecca that she doesn't get because she doesn't watch these movies. Anyway, but think about that. Think about the way that language connects you to brands. Okay, so case study, prom. So we got this client, they sell prom dresses. And we had to, it was kind of one of my first big clients, and we had to figure out the right voice to blog for them in. So what do we do? First thing we want to do is ask the client for information. They're going to have a lot of demographics, and they're going to be able to tell you who their customers are and who they want their customers to be. And then they're going to start telling you things about, and you need to ask for this information, how they want to be seen and how they don't want to be seen. And then you start asking them questions about the risk that they're willing to take, because some clients are willing to go there and some aren't, and your copy needs to reflect that. So then you take all of that information and you build a lexicon. A lexicon is a very fancy word, I love it, but it's just a list of words. And so this is a Google Doc that actually Katie helped me build. And what we did is the client said that their customers read 17 and Teen Vogue. So we just read through and we find the words that stick out. I'm in my 30s, it's pretty easy to find the words that stick out in Teen Vogue. There's a lot of them, like, well, funky was actually kind of familiar to me, but things like wow factor and unexpected, the way that they were using unexpected was rather unexpected, and chic, and so we just started keeping those words. And then saving them. The lexicon also is really handy later, because if you work in an agency like I do, you've got a lot of different clients. So if you want to sit back and figure out, it's been a month since you've written about prom, you've written about platform as a service, you've written about cloud computing, and you kind of need to get back into the voice again. It's like reading a good novel. You pick up the lexicon and all of a sudden you've got that vocabulary in front of you. And you'll see that we also did kind of parts of speech to kind of, because sometimes you really need a good adjective. So one thing to keep in mind though is the client, when they give you all this information about who their customers are, they're not always right. And they don't always know what their customers want. because the client's way older than the customer. They have a very different life experience. And then sometimes the writer isn't right either, because we're older too. Well, I'm older. Not all the writers are older, but I'm older than the customer. And in fact, I had an interesting experience putting this together with my husband last night, because he's born in '74, I'm born in '78. I wanted Pump Up the Volume, but he said no, it was his. And so, and then I wanted Bono, and he wouldn't let me have that. I tried to give him Bowie, and he's like, no. So that's 4 years difference and a marriage, and we still don't know, So it's important to kind of, so how do you find this information? How do you figure out what the customer down the line is actually speaking about? You go to their native habitat. Now, as a writer, you're always, always, always researching. The way that I found out where the prom kids hang out is I'm at the movie theater, and I'm waiting in line, and there's two 14-year-old girls behind me, and they're talking about Tumblr. And one friend is telling the other one how awesome it is and how it works, and that's not the first time that happened to me about Tumblr with teenage girls. So there are different places to go for different types of clients. But prom, Tumblr is where it's at, I think, right now. Okay, and then you want to research what your customers actually search for. In the case of prom dresses, it's kind of easy, but say your client wants to go out and branch into the UK market. They don't really have prom in the same way that we have prom. I was really surprised to see that quinceañera dresses are such a small part of the market. I think that we should bring quince back, and then everybody can have a quince and a sweet 16 and a prom, and then our clients will have all the money, and then I can spend all that money traveling the world. Then you want to immerse yourself in the culture. So what I started thinking about with prom was, what were these girls doing when they were tweens? Like, what were they interested in? Because I wanted to know not just what they're talking about now, but I wanted to know what their cultural reference are. So I turned on Hannah Montana at work for a good long time and watched it. Rebecca says it's because I liked it. It's not true. Okay, well, I did watch 7 episodes. Okay, anyway, but I learned a lot from Hannah Montana. Anyway. So, and then what I did is I bring it all back together when I started writing this paragraph about prom. So you've got Hannah Montana words in purple. She uses words like crushing on and kick it up. And then we've got this lexicon over here, and those are all the yellow words, like all eyes will be on you, and super cute and sophisticated. And frankly, even if my client is wrong about whether the kids actually use these words from Teen Vogue and whatnot, they are words that kids are going to have seen, and they're words that the client's comfortable with, which means they're going to be more comfortable with a copy, which is important. And then the Tumblr, I brought one thing in from Tumblr. And then the keywords, obviously, are in blue. The thing about Tumblr, though, is if you want to get really depressed, look on Tumblr about prom, because teens will tell you the truth. And it's not what you can tell your client, and it's not what you can probably write about for their blog. Remember when we talked about risk? But it's important to know, because it gives you the background that you need. So just remember that if your voice isn't authentic, you're going to lose the client and the customer. And, I don't know if y'all remember Frasier. All I ever remember about Frasier is how they couldn't pronounce anything. And when you find the right voice, you get the return on the investment. It's important. It's worth spending the time to do it. So learn the brand voice, and you're in. Do you guys have any questions?
When you're getting started with a new client that hasn't done any of this before, do you have a process with pulling that information from them, like a questionnaire, that sort of thing? How do you go about that?
Yeah, we absolutely have a questionnaire, and some of those questions that you saw are pulled from that questionnaire. It's pretty extensive, and one of the things that we're starting to realize important is how important it is for the copywriter to be on that initial call where you're talking about content, because there's nuances that we as writers pick up that other people aren't going to pick up. It's fine. Other people don't have to pick it up. You really need to know things about the contract or whatever. We need to know the nuance.
You can keep it.
Okay.
I can talk loud.
Okay.
Totally crushing on your presentation.
Thanks.
I actually have 3 questions. I'll ask them. You
Okay.
can ask them all in sequence. This totally new process to me.
Yeah.
How long does it usually take to complete this research phase for your average client? And once that process happens, how much content are you typically creating for an average client that you deal with? And finally, my third question, remember, what's the craziest piece of content you had to create?
Okay, well, the craziest piece of content, I'm going to do them in reverse order. The craziest piece of content I ever had to create wasn't really crazy, but it kind of drove the client crazy. I wrote what to put in your prom purse, which I thought was kind of normal, kind of like 70% content, like no big deal, except for I said they should put tampons in. Apparently, girls who go to prom not hit that stage of their lives yet, according to the client. So, but yeah, so it takes a while. And that's why one of the things that we try and do is we try and find customers that we can invest in and we can invest the time. It gets better with time too, and we're always open. And the thing about the teen girls is they're the linguistic innovators. Their language changes faster, and they're the ones who bring new words to our language. And so you got to keep on top of them. But, I learned a lot. Probably from the first 20 minutes of Hannah Montana I watched. I could have pulled one of those phrases out, whatever. So I could have, I learned a lot pretty early. And so I would say with a couple of hours of investment of both magazines and watching, I probably had a much better handle on it than the average writer just coming in would. Yeah. And then how much content we write. For that client, we were writing 10 blog posts a month. 5 of them were sometimes about prom, and so it seemed worth it. It made me write. The other thing that happened is we've got a certain amount of time that we're expected to write a blog post in, and it made me turn them around faster because I was in the prom head, much to my husband's chagrin, and I could write it.
I can still speak up too. So, because one of my client things kind of translates to your prom thing. At what point do you talk to them as an authority figure, since they are a prom store, and not try to get down and talk on the level of the teen girls? Mm-hmm. Is like where do you draw that line? Where say, okay, we're going to talk like an adult, or versus talk like a girl?
You have to tread that line pretty carefully because, of course, the girls are looking at the dresses and the girls are finding the dresses, but it's the parents that are buying it. And I think that that's kind of where the tampon thing came in, is like you're treading a very careful line. For example, the things that I found on Tumblr, they're not things that I would ever tell the parents are happening. The parents need to find that out on their own if they don't remember. And obviously you're dealing with your client as well. And there comes a time where you have to be careful and you have to give in. But yeah.
So you talked a bit about the lexicon and being able to formulate the language to speak with them. What are some of your favorite ways to actually come up with the ideas for the blog posts, right? Besides just watching the Hannah Montana videos and reading the other 17 magazine websites and that sort of thing.
So my favorite thing to do with that is, one, we do it as a group. We usually brainstorm as a group because it's a lot more fun. You have more heads in the room. The other thing is, it's all about putting yourself in the head of the client. And so, prom wasn't that long ago, but maybe only half my life. But yeah, so think about, just kind of really put yourself inside the experience. I feel like there's an aspect of writing that's almost like acting, like you put yourself so far inside of it that like you want the boys to be looking at you and you want to look good but not too good, And so to think about what are the things you'd want to know. And you can do that with any client. But, yeah. You had a question? Yeah, Cynthia.
Well, I wanted to ask you, as a writer of fiction, so building a lexicon is a very, very common thing that any fiction writer would do. So Barry Hannah, if he's writing an essay about bookmaking, the trick is to build a list of 100 words that relate to bookmaking implements. Whatever the stabber thing is that it's not an awl, but it's like something that makes like the circles that the bookbinding can be made, the special glue, all that kind of stuff. So this is an idea. I love the idea of making a lexicon because it gives you such credibility. So my question is, what do you think your background as a fiction writer has brought to your ability to write in a specific client's milieu?
I think it helps a lot. That's why I tell my friends who have MFAs, I'm like, you should totally do this, but it's not every MFA should be a copywriter. It's not always a good match. But I think that it is getting inside the head of that character, and that's kind of where the acting comes in also, is you get to know the world, and I mean, we're world building, right? We're inside the world of a novel. You know what questions there are. You know what you know what the streets are usually, even if you don't name them. And so you know the world of the. I don't necessarily know the world of cloud computing, but you know the things to. The problems, the pitfalls, where you as a writer can help come in and patch up the things. And that's fun. I mean, that's the best thing about being a writer, is like fixing things in this weird way that nobody else can do it. Yeah, Mike.
So you mentioned writing for prom, which you also mentioned is something that you've done in your life, maybe half of your life ago or whatever. But what about something that is, that's what she said. What about something that is like literally you have to learn the book on it? And you mentioned like cloud computing. At what point do you draw the line of like, well, I simply don't know enough about this to talk about it? How do you handle that?
Depends on if there's anybody else around to pick up the slack. Sometimes you do it anyway, and you can do this. I mean, you can go in and you can learn the language. For me, it's about, I mean, like in my personal life, I've chosen not to learn any languages that don't use the Roman alphabet, because Cyrillic looked too hard and I didn't want to do Chinese. But so those are where I drew those lines with that kind of language. And with the techie stuff, there's only so far that I can go. When I don't feel like I understand it anymore, then I stop. And cry for mercy, because I'm not doing anybody any service if I don't understand it. But you'd be surprised. There's one client that we have that's got a lot of copy editing. You might have heard about it. And it's very technical, and I don't always understand the words, but I find that if I sit there and I read it for an hour, and read it and read it and read it, I understand it. And I couldn't probably go home and have a conversation about it, but I know when the words are in the right place, and then I could write about it to a certain extent, because research is always available too, right? My Google works.
It's your Google works.
Yeah.
Have you ever gone as far as doing like user studies on the content that you create to give feedback to see if you made the correct assumptions about what language they like and their interests?
Well, I haven't had that opportunity, but I think that's a fantastic idea. We look at the analytics in terms of like how well things are responded to, but I think it would be really great to kind of get down on the ground and see, because the thing is you're always going to miss somebody, and it would be fascinating and a great learning experience to find out where you did. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
You just mentioned metrics and how response. How do you measure response times?
We do, honestly, one of the things I love about working at Fortin is they really let us focus on writing. So our account strategists do a lot of that, but we measure engagement like anybody else with Google Analytics, and how much somebody goes to the next blog post, how much they convert based on from that copy, and then if they check out the copy now and convert 7 things later, you can measure all of those things. Anybody else? Yeah.
So knowing that brand voice and team girls change frequently,
Yeah.
how do you account for the management of the content? Blogs are going to age, that's how it is. You update the copy as you go.
Well, with this client, we were lucky. They kept taking the blog posts down. That's a whole other issue. No, that's a great question. And the thing is blogs, so Google, I've heard, it pays less attention to older content anyway, and so they're probably less likely to find it anyway, so you just continue to add new content on top of it, and it will get buried. But yeah, that's a great question. If it was my blog, I would go back and I would fix it, and I would update it, or age it, mark it in such a way that it is, it's 2013 all over it, and then let it be retro. Yeah?
Sorry, one more question. Have you seen any value in generating traffic from this kind of research that you're doing to discover words and phrases that you might not typically find through keyword research? Like, does it help you capture additional traffic that you wouldn't consider?
I haven't done any A/B testing on that. That would be a really great thing to do.
One quick thing, what's your take on these online slang dictionaries?
Uh-huh.
Are those helpful, or do they set you in the wrong direction in terms of learning context?
Well, for me, the fact that you can get like 30 answers to any of them, it's hard to pick through and know what the right one is unless you're already speaking the language a little bit. So I think that they're misleading unless you really, really know what you're doing. They're super fun if you're looking up How I Met Your Mother episodes, though. Yeah.
I think going back to the process that Kane was asking about, how much of this is, and how often do you have to do a come to Jesus with your clients for the content that you produce? Because being content creators, sometimes we go way out there going, this is link bait worthy, but then they're like, oh no, that's not a brandable thing,
Yeah.
right? So how often do you have to do that with your clients?
I think that the more that you're having that come to Jesus without them firing you, the better off you're doing. I mean, because you've got to push them, and they need you to push them, and they hired you to push them, even when they hate it. Anybody else? Well, anyway, thank you so much, Kane.